G'day guys, Adam Cogan here from SSW TV, and we are at the Sofitel at the Digital Workplace Conference, and we are here with Mark Rhodes. How are you, Mark?
I'm good, Adam. How are you?
Excellent. And I am looking forward to talking to you about all things automation.
Okay.
And I assume that includes PowerShell and other cool stuff?
It includes whatever you want it to include, as long as it's automation.
Okay, so before we get started, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you end up, you've had quite a successful career and now you're at Microsoft. Tell us your journey to get here.
Sure. I started in IT in about 1999 actually, working for a company that was doing porn filtering on the internet. And somehow I went from being a Linux admin there to working at Microsoft, which is kind of a funny progression. Along the way I spent a lot of time doing scripting and automation and the like. And now at Microsoft I'm one of the people who helps train PowerShell.
All right, so how important is PowerShell?
Extremely important, and it's important at a number of levels to IT admins.
Okay, and how do we get started with PowerShell?
Okay, obviously the easiest way to get started is to open up PowerShell on a machine and start dumping in some commands. There are 3 commands you can use to get started, so I tell all my students,
yes,
looking for the right word, what to use. And the first one is get-command. That will tell you what commands you can use on any given system, right? So if you have an idea of I want to add a user, you can type in get-command -noun user, and it will return everything that starts with the noun user, because PowerShell is in the format of a verb -noun. So an action -object, effectively.
So if you know you just want to create a site, is that good enough?
Well, then you could type in get-command -noun site, right? Or -noun site, which will give you wildcard version of that.
Okay.
Yep. The second command is get-help, because if you know what the command is, you can get help about the command, and it'll tell you all the ways you can engage with it. It'll tell you examples. It'll tell you what all of the parameters are. So that information is extremely valuable. And the third one is get-member. So being a developer, you know what a object is, right?
Yes.
Tell me about an object. What's it got?
Well, an object can have lots of different properties.
Properties and?
Methods.
Methods, exactly. So when you type in get-member to anything PowerShell object related, you get all the properties and all of the members. And it's very easy then for someone to know, for instance, on an object I can add, I can subtract, I can view the parameters. I tell my students who are very unfamiliar with this stuff generally to envisage PowerShell objects as a coin. I think I've got one here.
As a coin?
Yeah, a coin. So if this is a PowerShell object, right, we have things you can do with it and things that are information about it. So for instance, a property of this coin is it was minted in 2015. Another property is it's got the queen on one side. On the other side it's got a platypus. Its property of value is 20 cents. On the other hand, if it's a PowerShell object, it also has methods. And methods are what? Things you can do with it. Right, so what can you do with it?
You can drop it.
You can drop it, you can pick it up, you can spend it, you can lose it in the couch.
Right.
Right. So if you think of this as a PowerShell object, it makes it a very easy way to visualize objects in PowerShell.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Ah, your props are much better than Sean Spicer's props.
I don't know Sean
Spicer, he's the guy that was speaking for Donald Trump. He was using props to explain different things. Don't worry.
Right. Well, maybe I've got a future as a press secretary.
All right. Now, obviously PowerShell takes some time to write and get right, and I want to ask you lots of questions about that, but is this for all companies? Is this for a company with 10 people and 1 system administrator, or is this for companies that are thousands of employees?
Both. Now, PowerShell versus, all right, you can always do something in a UI, right? And you can almost always do something in PowerShell. Office 365 being a great example. You can always add a user via a portal, or you can add a user via PowerShell. And
Office 365 has the beautiful admin center.
It does.
And SharePoint has the nice central admin stuff.
Well, the question there is, why would you use PowerShell over an admin center? And the answer to that is if you've got repeatable tasks. Right? Because PowerShell is no good if you're doing something one-off. It will take you longer to develop a script. Generally, if you're not familiar with PowerShell, it'll take you longer to develop a script than it will to go into a portal and do something once. But if you need to do something for 400 people, then PowerShell makes a lot more sense.
Right. And what size is the smallest company you see bothering with PowerShell?
Well, it depends on the company, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
So, and it depends on the technology they're using. For instance, if it's a small company and they were born in the cloud, they probably wouldn't use PowerShell too much unless they had a specific task they could only do with PowerShell.
But what about repetitive tasks, even for little companies? Let's talk about onboarding. Every company has to deal with a new employee coming on.
Yes.
You give them a new user, you give them some licenses, I don't know, they might want to be added to teams now and different things like that.
Sure. So most larger organisations have an onboarding workflow. Right, and what would happen typically in this kind of thing would be a new user comes on board as part of an HR onboarding process. When HR kicks off a workflow or adds an item to a list or even just talks to the IT guy and says, I need you to create up this account for me, what's actually happening there behind the scenes is the user gets created, the user gets licenses assigned, the user has a password set, the user gets all of their services provisioned for them, right? And then finally, all of this information gets packaged up and sent off in a welcome pack. Right, and that can be sent via email, or it can be sent as a printout, or one of the companies I work with actually, I got a welcome pack in the mail that contained chocolates, a company shirt, and all my login credentials. And if you want to create a pretty special experience, getting a box from a company before you started with all of those details, that's really cool. Yeah,
especially if it's all automated.
It was all automated at the time, and
wow.
There are several companies that offer automation engines to make this easier. Given that we're in an audience that has lots of SharePoint engagement, there are two companies just outside, K2 and Intex. Both of them make products that can do onboarding workflows. However, that's not necessarily the only way you can do it. So if you had if your problem was that you wanted to license users when they came on board, there are solutions that Microsoft make available now. And one of those might be group-based licensing. So Azure offers the ability for you to set a group of people and give them a license now. And that's through Azure Active Directory.
Right. But and to make that automated, do I find the commandlet and run that with PowerShell?
Well, that would be another way to do it. But group-based licensing is all portal-based now. So you say anyone who's in the domain users group, assign this license automatically, and it will update within minutes. Right. Okay. The other benefit is, have you heard of dynamic group membership in Azure Active Directory? Okay, if you can have a parameter or a property or a bit of information that says anyone who, say, reports to Adam will be a member of Adam's report line group, right? That's a dynamic group. So if someone gets added in the organisation to your team, they'll be dynamically added to that group. Or if they've got the word media in their job title, they can be added to the media or HR group or whatever you want to call it, right? Okay. Sorry, PR group. So you've got dynamic groups being created on the fly based off properties. You can assign licenses to those groups. So if you said only Adam's group needs access to Power BI licenses, then therefore you add the dynamic group to the group-based license, and it will automatically license all your users. But that's only really a solution if the only problem you have is licensing your users. Most commonly, people have onboarding problems that they want to deal with at the same time.
Right, okay. Now with these commands, how do you feed these with lists of data, with CSV files or whatever?
Okay. Typically, IT admins are actually really good at generating lists of data and then executing scripts against lists of data. Right, for instance, they might retrieve a list of servers and then do an action against all of those services servers in a script. So in that case, they're populating something like a CSV file and then executing against that CSV file. A better approach, though, with PowerShell is to retrieve a listing of something, transform the data inside the PowerShell script, and then execute something more PowerShell against that data. For instance, if I wanted to get a list of all my users in Office 365, I could type in get-msoluser-limit all. That will return all of my users. Oh. I can pipe that, and if you have used Linux in the past, you might be familiar with the pipeline, which takes the output of one field and output of one commandlet and brings it to the input of the next one. Oh, so if I typed in get-msoluser-limit all, right, pipe that to set-msoluser-user principal name ssw.com.au. Any users that don't have that set to SSW might be transformed to have a new user principal name of @ssw.com.au. It's a bad example, but I think you get my idea.
Yeah, I do. Yep. How many commandlets do I have to learn?
Well, 3.
Right, just the 3 you told us about.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, where do you spend most of your time? Like, is it Exchange or is it Office 365? Is it SharePoint? Is it
Well, for me, it's in Azure. But I work with specific tasks, so I'm trying to solve specific problems, and I'm using, for the most part, Azure Automation to solve those problems. which brings us into the automation space.
Does that solve problems that PowerShell can't solve?
Yes, it does. So, okay, let's talk about this problem. You're an IT administrator and you're running scheduled tasks right now on your servers.
Okay.
What are the problems with that?
I don't know.
Okay, let's say you leave the organisation and you haven't documented where those scheduled tasks are. If you've got 50 servers, where are they running from?
From my machine.
Are they running from
From
your
my
machine?
account.
Are they running from a server? Are they running from your account? They're usually not documented well.
Whoa.
So bringing all of your scripts under one place and being able to execute them, even if you need to execute on premises from a remote centralized location, is a wonderful idea, and that is what Azure Automation does. It takes any PowerShell scripts, right, and these are referred to within Azure Automation as runbooks, and it allows you to store them in one central repository, schedule when they execute, and target an execution location, whether that be executing up in the cloud or executing via an agent that's installed in your servers against an on-premises resource.
Okay, so I think, are you telling me that sometimes you shouldn't be investing in PowerShell, you should be investing in Azure Automation with runbooks instead?
Well, they're the same thing at that level. So a runbook is literally PowerShell or PowerShell Workflow, which is another version of PowerShell.
Oh, okay. So I can imagine where people go down the wrong road, and they're not even familiar with Azure Automation.
Well, exactly, and one of the big problems with PowerShell, and this gets away from Azure Automation a bit, is organisational maturity, right? Because an IT administrator can collect a bucket of scripts, that's fine, but if he leaves the organisation, nobody's going to know about those scripts. They're not going to be documented. They're not going to be in source control most likely. Most part, they're not even in Dropbox. I mean, that would be your lowest level of, rational source control. It's not. I agree with you. I put all my scripts in GitHub.
We've seen developers use Dropbox as their source control. Yes, we have to explain that is not source control.
It's not source control. GitHub, sign up for a free GitHub account. Put all of your stuff in a private repository. It's that easy.
Well, you could use visualstudio.com.
I don't use it myself, but that's just my own personal preferences.
They're as good as each other. But
absolutely.
But I like the tools I'm used to. Now, how do I test this stuff before I execute it against thousands of accounts?
Okay, let's say you've got a PowerShell script and you've put that in Azure Automation, right? You get a bit of an idea of how to test things through the test pane. Okay, it's a pane inside of Azure that allows you to see the input and output of PowerShell scripts. At the same time too, you can actually modify PowerShell scripts to use the -whatif command. So if you type in new-AD user or new-MSOL user for Office 365, -name Adam Cogan, now, that's not exactly the syntax, but it's close enough for this purpose, -whatif, what it'll do is say, I'm going to execute this command and try to add a new user, adam.cogan@ssw.com.au to the directory. Right, so you can see exactly what's happening.
Does it actually add the account?
It doesn't add it, it synthesizes it. So it's saying this is what it's going to try to do.
And it will just tell you whether it would have been successful.
Exactly.
Okay. All right, and that's the best way of testing?
That's one of the best ways of testing. What I try to do is, whenever I'm whipping up a script, it's generally doing lots of tasks for repeatable purposes.
Yes.
I'll generally create a test object or a test case and make sure my script works only against that test case before running it against everything.
Okay. So Mark, I assume PowerShell developers have the same pieces of script used a lot. How do they reuse pieces?
Sure. Inside of PowerShell, we've got the concept of commandlets, functions, and modules. Okay, now this is a cut down version, but it's good enough for this. Commandlets are literally commands that you can run on PowerShell. Functions are aggregates. So for instance, exactly the same as a function in a bit of .NET code, right?
Okay.
You can run a function, you call a function, and it's a repeatable block of code that can be run with parameters.
Right, but these, we're talking about text files here. How do you reference the other text files?
Well, okay, so you can store your functions and commandlets inside of a module. So once you've created a module, all you need to do is to type into any PowerShell session, import -module, the module name, and those functions and commandlets will be there. And then all you need to do is use those in your text file, and it will just work.
Okay, all right. Now, how about checking once you've run it, you think it's run successfully, it doesn't give any errors. How do you check the data is correct? Do you run more PowerShell?
You could, yes.
Things to list things, or is there other ways of just checking it?
Well, there are several ways. Okay, first off is you could create an object when you're actually adding a user. At the same time, you create an object in PowerShell that does this for you, and you can pull back the properties of the object as you're creating it to see if it's created correctly.
Oh, so that'd really slow down the scripts, wouldn't it?
Not necessarily, no. Maybe fractional, like talking milliseconds.
Right. So that's a semi-unit. Well, it's being defensive in your coding style, isn't it?
I'm not a coder.
Well, you're creating it and then you're checking it's there.
That's what I do, but that you shouldn't have to do that if you're coding in PowerShell correctly, because you should know what your inputs are for your functions. Therefore, you don't need to check that the imports created an object with the right parameters.
Right. Okay. Mark, it just occurred to me, this Azure Automation sounds amazing. Is this very expensive?
No. This is kind of cool. You can get up to 500 minutes of Azure Automation every month for $0.
500 minutes, $0. Would I use that up?
You may do if you had scripts running fairly frequently, but there are ways you can actually get around problems like this. For instance, if you're doing Exchange provisioning, right, all of the Exchange Online provisioning, all of the Exchange Online stuff happens inside a remote management console, right, a remote PowerShell session. So what you could do is open the session, kick off whatever that has to happen, and then close the session, and you would only use a few seconds worth of time rather than using 10 minutes for provisioning. Does that make sense? So there are ways you can like extend how much time you get. Regardless, Azure Automation is incredibly cheap anyway.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, I don't have the cost on it, but it's not expensive at all.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you definitely should be using it.
You should definitely be using it. And there's one thing it does better than anything else that people tend to forget about. It stores credentials securely.
Oh,
right.
Okay.
So you can store credentials in a PowerShell script by, encrypting them on the local machine. Now, the problem with that is you can't take them to another machine, right? If you encrypt a text file, right, it's encrypting it with the machine key on that machine. So if you take it to another machine, it's not going to be able to decrypt it. Second off, it's pretty easy to decrypt something with a machine key.
Yep.
Right.
Can brute force.
You can. There are ways to get around it. The easiest way to store credentials is in Azure Automation. So what you can do is it creates an Azure Key Vault, and it stores all of the credentials in there securely for you. And all you have to do is reference those credentials as a variable inside your scripts.
And can I use those cloud stuff in the Key Vault on premise?
Yes, you can.
How can I?
So you can, Azure Automation will work quite well in that regard. All you need to do is install a connector, and scripts can be run on premises just like they are in the cloud, except the execution target will be an on-premises server. So it takes away the problem of having scheduled tasks all around your data center, right, and consolidates them to a single location where you can view the execution, get reports on them too. Right, it's a really clever innovation.
I think that's one of the best tips I've heard, this Key Vault, because that's definitely been a problem that people discuss all the time, and everyone comes up with a little, like they know you shouldn't put it in plain text, but
they do.
Yes, everybody knows that, and they still do it sometimes, but those solutions don't sound as good as the Key Vault.
It's just part of Azure Automation. That's just, it includes a Key Vault when it provisions.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Power BI is something I love. I love exploring data that we have, and is there any way of using Power BI against like all the admin console, like all the admin stuff of Office 365 or Exchange or anything?
There probably is, but I don't know how you would do it. I'm sorry, I don't know Power BI well enough.
Okay, all right, that's awesome. Last question, Mark. Do you script everything? Do you put everything into, like, do you use source control from the beginning, or do you just write scripts and then someone's put them in? How do you work? So
I don't use source control from the beginning. What I do typically is if I've built a script that I think is worthy of going into source control. Now, for me, it's am I going to use it again, right? Or will someone else get value from this? These are my two examples. If either of those two conditions are met, I will upload the script into GitHub. Otherwise, it just stays on my local desktop, or it stays inside the PowerShell session I created. Because quite often I'll create a script for a specific purpose, and it's only inside the PowerShell session, or it's only inside VS Code.
Wow. All right. Well, Mark, that was amazing. I learned heaps. That was fantastic. And this is Adam Cogan at the Digital Workplace Conference, signing off for SSW TV.